Hello, all you wonderful Authors Love Readers podcast listeners out there. I'm so happy that you're here. Before this episode starts, I want to talk a little bit about Patreon. And the first thing I want to say is we have a charter Patreon supporter, Linda D. I'm so excited that we have a Patreon supporter and that she was the one who broke the ice and started us. And amazingly, then we have two more supporters who came right behind her. We have Jennifer S. and Laura D. We hope more of you will join Lisa, Jennifer, and Laura in becoming a Patreon supporter of Authors Love Readers podcast. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm asking for your support of the podcast through Patreon donations. Let me tell you, it's really hard for me to ask. As my friends would tell you, I'm not good at asking for help at all. The reason that I set up for the Authors Love Readers podcast, it is not for me as an individual author. It's strictly for the podcast. I would love for the podcast to become self-supporting because I've been supporting it to this point. The expenses include having the podcasts edited, because you'll be surprised to know we talk longer than you actually listen. And I have a monthly fee for hosting the files because these are big files. And what I would love is to have people donate, a couple dollars a month would be terrific. $2 a month would be 50 cents an episode. It would be a sign of support and it would help defray some of these costs. So that would be the way I could keep the podcast going on. And I hope you'll consider that. Thank you.
I'm Brenda Hiatt, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Authors Love Readers podcast. Happy to have Brenda Hiatt along with me. Frequent listeners to the podcast will be absolutely stunned to hear that I know Brenda through Novelists Inc. In fact, we were on the board together because she was the president and I was the president-elect. Then I became the president the following year. So we served together. We did our duty together. And Brenda is going to tell us a little bit about what kind of books she writes.
Hi, everyone. Well, I've written historical romance novels for a very long time. My first book was a short traditional Regency romance published by Harlequin back in 1992. So I've been at this a long time. I did several of those and then moved on to the longer and slightly steamier historical romances when the traditional Regency market sort of dried up, and wrote several of those for HarperCollins' Avon romance line. And then I took a little break and ended up going indie after getting rights back to some of my older books and putting those up myself. And I had been a bit burned out on the historicals because I had some very tight deadlines back to back, which is the main reason I took that break. And mostly to get myself excited about writing again, I decided to attempt a whole different genre for fun mostly, and tried my hand at a young adult science fiction romance. And I have had so much fun with these books. It turned into a series, and my Starstruck series, and I just last month published, well, this would have been in October. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but in October I released book, let's see, I guess technically book 6. There's a book 4.5 that's a novella. So the main series was 4 books, and I intended it to just be a 4-book series. But right. I had so many readers asking for more books that I wrote kind of a bridge novella to be a jump off into spin-off books from the series. And I've now written 2 of those spin-off books. And I have written another historical romance since I walked away from traditional publishing, and I put that out a little over, let's see, I guess a little over a year ago. 2 years ago. Now I forget. Gallant Scoundrel. And I'm currently writing another historical romance right now that I'm planning to release this coming spring.
Now, I told you I might jump around, and I am, in fact, going to jump into a writing question. It's a question from a reader, and I wonder if it had any impact when you picked up the YA series again. The reader asks if when we finish a story, do we think about and miss the characters? So I'm wondering if that helped propel you back into the series along with the reader reaction.
It did. It did. I was missing the world and the characters, and just how writing those books made me feel. I guess there's something about teen romances that are so fun because you can put so much emotion out there on the page. Because at that age, everything is so new and so world, it's like the end of the world if the guy you have a crush on doesn't notice you. I mean, everything is life or death. And when you can superimpose stuff that's real life or death onto the high school perceived life or death stuff, it's just a lot of fun. I've had so much fun with these books. My first love was the historicals, but my new love has been these YA books.
I would think that the voice and the pacing might be really different between those.
Yes, yes, very different.
Then how do you feel? Do the do those carry over to your everyday life in how you feel when you're writing those? Do those have an emotional impact on you as you're creating them?
That's hard to say. I'm not sure if that's the case. Maybe a little bit. Mostly, what seems to have the most emotional impact on my day to day life is how well the writing is going, regardless of which genre I'm currently writing in. When the writing is going well, I'm usually in a pretty good mood. And when it's not, I'm usually not.
That's the truth, isn't it? Yeah.
I don't like go around talking, in Regency cant or anything like that when I'm writing a Regency. I mean, sometimes I do slip words into my conversations that make people look twice at me.
How about the different elements of the books? Like if you get to the dark, the black moment, and do you find that it carries over into your real life moods?
Some, yeah. When I'm getting into more intense parts of a book, I find myself kind of living in that book when I'm not writing.
Right.
It's in my mind a lot. I dream about it. I'm thinking about it. I blurt out stuff over meals, whatever. But yeah, it's hard to disengage once a book starts to get to the more intense parts. Definitely.
I said when I was writing at the beginning, and then I was also working full time at the Post. One of the things that pushed me to go part time is I used to accidentally call coworkers by character names, and they go, "Who are you talking to?" Oh, these people in my head. Okay, let's come back now. See, I hop around. Can you think of a childhood book that really addicted you to story that said, okay, this is what I want to do?
Um, I don't know about a book that addicted me in the sense of making me want to be a writer, but there were certainly a few books that hooked me as a reader very early on. I remember the one I remember most was I was in maybe third grade or thereabouts, and the teacher was reading aloud in class a chapter or part of a chapter to the class each day. And it was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, C.S. Lewis. And I got so caught up in the story that I could not wait for her to finish reading it to us a chapter at a time. And I went and got the book out of the library, and it was a little above my reading level at the time. Maybe I was in second grade. It was a little above my reading level at the time, but I wanted to know so badly what was going to happen next that I finished reading the book myself long before she finished reading it to us, and then went on to read the rest of that series. I don't know if I did that right away or not, but that was the book that first made me impelled to go get a book and read it to see what would happen next.
Did you ever have stories, uh, not just that age, but anytime kind of pre-author days, that you mentally or actually rewrote the ending? And that could be books or movies.
Oh, I rewrote the ends of movies all the time, and TV shows, and books sometimes. And I did write little stories even as a kid. I mean, mostly silly stuff. Um, and I didn't have any inkling of how to spin a good tale or anything. But I made up stories for my friends all the time. I didn't write them down, but I loved.
Mm.
I was just really a kind of a terrible liar as a kid. I kind of lied a lot because I would make up stories just for effect, if to get my friends to scare them or to make them laugh or to get them to do things because they believed me. I used to do that a lot as a kid. I wasn't a real good kid, I guess. Uh, but I used to make up stories all the time, not always for benevolent purposes, I'll say.
We used to do plays, and I was the writer of the plays. But the funniest part about it, we had a little clubhouse. A long story, but we had a little clubhouse in my backyard called Fort Pioneer, and we would invite the parents to come to a play at Fort Pioneer. And then while we had them in the audience, we'd all run home and get cookies out of the kitchen and come back and sell them their own cookies. A budding entrepreneur.
Yeah.
How about from earlier in life? Did you have things that you worried about or fretted about that seem so important? Now you look at it and you go, "Oh, come on!" And then do you use that stuff in your YA books?
I mostly not as a young child, but more as a teen. I was just so incredibly self-conscious as a teenager, constantly worried about what people would think of me for this, that, any minor tiny thing I wore or did. I obsessed about what people thought of me. And looking back, I realized nobody was thinking of me at all. They were all too busy worrying about themselves and what they thought people were thinking of them.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't occur to me back then. So yeah, I've definitely used that to inform my YA books, remembering how obsessed teens can be with other people's opinions and how foolish that kind of turns out to be.
The only issue I have with that, it's not issue. Um, my mother always used to say, nobody's thinking about what or noticing what you're doing or what you're wearing, and or how you're reacting. And I'm thinking, I notice other people because I think as writers, and whatever there is in our personality that brings us to writers, we do tend to observe those things. So the argument that other people weren't, that just never worked for me. Now I realize there's some people who don't, which, okay, there's differences. Okay, how about songs? And either now or both, now or when you were younger, did you have songs that really meant a lot to you? And do you write to music? Do you have music playing while you're writing?
So right now, because I'm working on a historical romance, I've got my Regency writing playlist that has a lot of Tchaikovsky. I've got the whole Nutcracker on there and various other classical stuff that's not necessarily of exactly that era, but it puts me in the mindset for the
Yes.
era.
Yeah.
And when I'm writing my YAs, I mostly write to muse, because they just have that feel that I'm going for in my books.
Huh.
It's a lot of yearning, kind of high stakes sort of lyrics, and they also have a lot of like kind of space themes and stuff in their books. And my with the sci-fi angle of my books, it works well too. In fact, each of my YA books, I've kind of picked a muse song that's the theme for that book.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I'm always impressed though when people can write to anything with lyrics.
Well, I just have it on replay, and after you've heard it, a few thousand times. The lyrics don't really, I didn't used to. I did not used to be able to write to anything with lyrics at all. I never did before I started writing the YAs. I never attempted to write with music with lyrics. It was always like classical stuff or movie soundtracks. I wrote one historical that's not Regency to the soundtrack of the movie Titanic on perpetual replay because I was going for that feel. It was my shipwreck book, and I wanted to get a similar kind of feel to it. So I had that soundtrack playing.
I love movie soundtracks because they have variations of feeling and also I tend to write I write to soundtracks of old Errol Flynn movies. And there's one where it's da 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 da, and the faster it goes, the faster I type. If I could just play that over and over and over, I could write more books. So this is a kind of a strange question. I love the question. I don't know that anybody has. Oh yeah, a couple people have answered it. Is there any good advice that you've received that you've ignored, and how did that turn out?
Let's see. Well, I guess there's the old standard, write what you know. That I have not adhered to particularly. I write what I can research or believably make up. But I haven't had that exciting a life that writing what I know would make for books people would necessarily want to read. I think a lot of us ignore that one.
I think so too. And I think about people talk about, oh, why don't you write about the Washington Post? And particularly I had editors in traditional publishing who's, why don't you write a romance set at the Washington Post? I'm going, it is not romantic. And I think it's, when we know it, we know the reality too well in some ways to make it a fun place to be. So maybe the advice should be write where you want to spend time, because you're going to spend a lot of time there.
Yeah, well, when I taught writing classes, which I did for a lot of years, what I used to advise people to do was to write what you love to read.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't try to write what you think will sell. Write what you love to read.
Well,
because otherwise it's just too much work to do it for just the money, and especially because there's no guarantee of any money anyway. You might as well enjoy it.
The only downside to that is I think when you start writing it, it does change your relationship with reading in that genre.
It does. That's true.
And it's not as much of an escape or fun because you're reading it as a writer. So maybe your second favorite.
It's true. I don't read historical romances the way I used to before I started writing. I can't. It's very hard for me to enjoy one the way I used to before I wrote them.
Yeah.
Because I can see the strings now.
Right.
Or, because of all the research I've done, I notice things I never would have noticed before. And that tends to spoil the reading experience if they got stuff wrong that I never would have known was wrong before.
Right.
Whatever,
but it yanks you out of the story. So let's talk about research. You've mentioned it a couple times. How do you approach research? At what point in the writing do you do?
Oh, let's see. I'm having to look way back now because I've been doing this for so long. But, I did the historicals for so long. And I started writing them back before there was an internet. And I did so much research from books, from libraries. Interlibrary loan was my friend. I went combing through the, microfiche of old newspapers and stuff like that. And I had to do a fair bit. I tried to just jump right into the first book I had an idea for when I first started writing, and realized less than a chapter in that there was so much that I assumed I knew from reading lots of Regencies that I didn't really know. All these little day-to-day detail things that I didn't actually know. And so I had to go back and start doing some research. What did they eat? When did they eat? Just all little details like that. Of course, now with the experience of many, many years, I'm realizing one reason I didn't know those things is because those endless scenes of meals are boring, and the good writers leave those out. But when I was starting out, I felt like I needed to have all that stuff detailed and show off my research, and so I needed to know it all in great detail.
Well, how about approaching the YA?
Well, my research has mostly been high schools and stuff, because it's been a long time since I was in high school, and these books are set in a very small town high school in Indiana. I lived most of the year in Indiana, or I did until recently, lived full time in Indiana, and so I set it not too far away in a fictitious town that was based on several real little towns. For part of my research, I spent driving around and visiting a lot of the little towns in that general vicinity where I was setting the book, because I have never actually lived in a small town.
Huh?
I've always lived in suburbs of cities, and I didn't really have a feel for small towns and small Indiana towns, and I needed to get that feel, and how things were likely to be laid out and in relation to each other and things like that. So that was really useful. And then I had the internet by then, which was of a great help, and I found some high school websites that were able to answer a whole lot of questions for me about the stuff that my characters would be dealing with day to day in school.
Oh, interesting. Did you have something you wanted to be before you were a writer? Did you think you were going to be something else?
I was going to be a veterinarian, actually. Growing up and even through college, most of the way through college, I intended to be a veterinarian. I worked as a vet assistant one summer while I was in high school, in fact.
What did you not like about it?
I had to assist a few times when an animal was put to sleep, and I really, really, really hated that. That was awful. But and I passed out once during an operation.
Whoops.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I wasn't bothered by it at all. I was actually very interested in watching it. It was a dog being spayed, and I was watching, and I was interested. And the next thing I knew, they were picking me up off the floor. It was very weird. And I'm not normally squeamish about blood or anything like that. So I have no idea. Anyway, that's the one time. It's never happened any other time.
Has that background, though, worked into books?
I've had animals in a fair number of books I've written. And in fact, my first published Regency, Gabriella, back in '92, my heroine was the daughter of a country veterinarian.
Oh, wow.
So I absolutely worked that.
Yeah, yeah. Did you feel that publishing that first book changed your writing process at all?
Yeah, I think it did. Because it was for Harlequin, and I had an option clause, and I was going to write more books for Harlequin, and so they had very specific requirements, both for length and for what they expect to be in a book. I mean, they're not formula per se, but those were sweet regencies. So,
Yeah.
no sex, certainly not on the page, and not even really implied. And the hero and heroine were expected to be together on the page most of the book, that sort of thing. And so I had to start really plotting, which I didn't start out as much of a plotter. I kind of made it up as I went along. And after selling that first book, I became much more of a plotter. I would outline, partly to make sure that it was going to come out to about the right length for them, and to make sure I had, just it made the writing a whole lot easier and quicker if I had an outline to work off of. I didn't necessarily stick super close to it, but I at least had a very rough outline when I started, which I had not done previously.
So the one of the readers asks, and this sort of touches into what you're talking about. the classic question of where do our stories come from? And she goes on to say, I know one author who dreams her stories, another has a character suddenly taking up residence in her head. So how are your beautiful stories born?
Writing has never come that easily to me. I hear authors occasionally talk about a gift book, one that just almost writes itself. I'm still waiting for that gift book. After
You have it to
20,
look forward
24
to.
books, I'm still waiting for that gift book to come along. Some have been easier to write than others, definitely, and some have been very difficult to write compared to others. But usually, my stories usually start with a what if. I almost always I start with some little what if that I start playing with and expanding and sometimes it fizzles out real quickly and I realize there's not a book there, and other times there definitely is a book there, and then I start, it'll be a character, and that what if may be about a character or just a situation, depends. But I've gotten ideas from all kinds of places. One story I've kind of liked to tell about that is one of my regencies back in the day. I got the idea for that whole book from a single line in a song I heard on the radio.
Oh.
And it was that, Frankie Valli, I think it was, the Venus make her fair. I'd love a girl with sunlight in her hair. Well, I just started thinking, okay, what if the goddess grants his wish but sends him a brunette? Is he going to assume it's not the right girl? And I got a book out of that.
That's
So,
great. Yeah. So then you have this idea, and so do you have a lot? Do you have a backlog of ideas? You have lots of ideas.
yeah, I jot ideas down because that always happens. You're into a book, especially you get about halfway in and you get into that mushy middle, and maybe you're not in the most exciting parts of the book right now, and this other idea comes along and tries to seduce you away from the book you're going to be writing. In fact, this happened so badly to me. The book I'm writing now, I started over a year ago, and another book seduced me away, and I actually wrote that whole other book, and now I've come back to this one. I try not to let that happen, and instead I write as much of it as comes to me in a little idea file for later. It's like, okay, this you get your turn. And I've got ideas in that file that I will probably never write. Some of them are just kind of the seed of an idea and probably don't justify a whole book.
Okay, so let's talk about. So you have this idea, and then I think a lot of people who haven't written books think that's the hard part, having the idea. Um, so how do you go from an idea to a book?
Well, like I say, I usually start with a what if. I sit down and play with it. I What has become kind of a favorite way to do this for me is the snowflake method, and it's, I think, Randy Ingermanson came up with that, or at least he has a website that details it. And I downloaded his little file on it, and I use that, and that's where you start with just the basic idea of it, the basic premise. And then you expand it. You come up with your main characters, and then you figure out your characters. I do that very early on when I'm turning an idea into a book, is I figure out who my main characters are going to be. And then I have to figure out what each of those characters want. And it's the old goal, motivation, and
Hmm.
conflict. What do they want? Why do they want it? And what's going to keep them from getting it? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and what flaws do they have that they're going to have to overcome to get to their goal? They're going to something in them that they're going to have to change. There's going to have to be a character arc. They're going to have to change over
Mm-hmm.
the story to be worthy of their happy ending. So I flesh all that out generally before I even start writing. Occasionally, just an idea will come to me, a scene or something will come to me, and I'll just write it and then go back and do that stuff. I mean, if something wants to come to me fully fledged, I'm going to put it on the page before it escapes. But that doesn't happen that often, unfortunately.
All right, we've covered a lot of territory here, but I want to be sure to tell the listeners um, books of yours that would be a good entry point if they've never read anything by you. What would be a good way for them to become acquainted with your work? Maybe one book or two books.
Well, there's a reason that I currently have all three of my series starters free in ebook to introduce readers to those books. So for my YA books, Starstruck, the first book in the series, and unlike my historicals, those books really they don't. Each one has a complete story in it, but they work best if they're read in order because they build on each other. That is not true of any of my historicals. My historical romances all completely stand alone and but I have two series. My traditional Regencies are very loosely linked series. I've republished them as Hyatt Regency Classics because they were the first books I ever published, and they all very much stand alone, but they're in a shared world, and some of the minor characters walk in and out of the different books.
That's fun.
And that's also true for my longer historical series, my Regency historicals, my Saint of Seven Dials series. That's kind of like it's kind of a Regency Robin Hood crossed with the Dread Pirate Roberts. There's a my Saint of Seven Dials is kind of a Regency Robin Hood, and when he falls in love and gets married, he passes his mask on to someone else who takes over the role of Saint of Seven Dials. But everybody in society thinks it's the same guy all along, even though it's a series of guys. So yeah, and so those really don't have to be read in order, but a lot of readers prefer to read them in order. So the first book of the series, Rogue's Honor, is free right now. There's a prequel sort of to that series, Scandalous Virtue, that's set in the same world and has some of the same characters, minor characters in it, but and I have that as a prequel, but it's tied in, but not as tightly as the other books in the series.
Do you have any books that you would consider like an overlooked gem that even your most loyal readers might have missed?
Yeah, definitely. Ship of Dreams, my shipwreck book I talked about, because it's not part of a series and it's not Regency. It's the closest thing to straight historical fiction I've written, though it is also a romance. But it is all centered on an actual shipwreck from the 1850s. And it was featured in, they've done news stories and stuff because I guess it was about 15, 20 years ago, they discovered the wreck. And they've been searching for it for a long time because a whole lot of gold went down on the ship because it was people returning from the California gold rush.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And Ship of Gold, there was a book, Ship of Gold in the Deep Blue Sea, nonfiction book about that. And I went to the source material. I actually was able to get from the Library of Congress the diary, the photocopy of the diary of one of the passengers on that ship, which was amazing. And I had her as a minor character in the book. And it was like the movie Titanic. Almost all the peripheral characters were real and the events were real, but my hero and heroine were fictitious and set on that real ship and all those circumstances. And but that one does not, because it doesn't tie into any of my other books. I think it's one of my best books, but it doesn't sell that well because it doesn't tie into any of my other books, and it doesn't have that discoverability of other books in a series.
And for the readers, we will have in the show notes, we will have links to Brenda's website and Facebook page where you can connect with her and find your books. So is there anything I haven't asked you that you wanted to answer?
I'll say that I try to have a presence at most of the main online areas because I mostly interact with readers online these days, email and a newsletter and Facebook and I'm on Twitter, though I don't do a lot on Twitter, and Instagram. And I have a reader group on Facebook, and that's becoming kind of fun. I've only recently, I guess it's been about a year now, had a reader group on Facebook, and that's a really good place for interaction, ongoing actual interaction.
So now we have a last part, which I really love, is the rapid fire either ors. Okay. And we'll just go through these and just say what comes to mind. Binge watch or making the watch last as long as possible.
Binge watch.
Opera or show tunes.
Show tunes.
Mountains or beach.
Beach.
Day or night.
Night.
House decorating or gardening.
Gardening.
Paper plates or best china.
Paper plates.
Hiking boots or cowboy boots.
Hiking boots.
Pickup or sports car.
Pickup.
Jigsaw puzzle or crossword puzzle.
Ooh, I love them both. Jigsaw puzzle.
Appetizer or dessert.
Ooh, love them both too. Appetizer.
Okay, I still give you cake or ice cream.
Ice cream.
Daisies or roses.
Roses.
Hot air balloon or a train trip.
Ooh, hot air balloon. I've never done that.
Cat or dog.
Cat.
Coffee or tea.
Tea.
Mustard or ketchup.
Mustard.
Winter Olympics or Summer Olympics.
Winter Olympics.
Sailboat or motorboat.
Sailboat.
Nail polish or bare nails.
Bare nails.
Leggings or sweats.
Leggings.
Spring or fall.
Fall.
Cruise or trekking vacation.
Ooh. Cruise.
And here's the last one. Grab the best for first or save the best for last.
I always save the best for last, and then I usually regret it.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I love these questions. I think it's fascinating which ones make people pause and think. And some come so bam, 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 and others people have, So this was a lot of fun, Brenda. I appreciate you spending this time with us. And as I said, all the information will be in the show notes for the listeners. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll come back next week for another edition of Authors Love Readers. And in the meantime, have a great week of happy reading.
Thanks for having me.
That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye.